So let's talk about totems in Battlegrounds. If you didn't notice, we're almost out of minion types for Battlegrounds that are already in Hearthstone. Totems are the only one left. So I think we have to assume totems are going to make their way to Battlegrounds. But totems traditionally have 0 attack. Of course, there are a few that don't. Totem Goliath, etc. And that could be the solution, just print big Totem Goliath style totems. But I think it'd be really good if we had 0 attack totems in Battlegrounds 2, which is like a crazy balancing task. I don't know what that would look like. I don't know how that would play. It seems like it'd be very different than every other minion type. And that's why I tasked you guys to make some custom Totem Battlegrounds cards. What would totems look like in Battlegrounds? And I think you came up with some really cool mechanics and ways that this could satisfy the totem fantasy and still fit into Battlegrounds. That said, let's kick it off here with Thunderon's Staff from Kogeti. This would be a tier 6 totem. It's a 0/12, satisfying that nice 0 attack. And it reads, whenever an enemy minion attacks, deal 12 damage to it. So this is great. You've got an on-card trigger that's doing something, that's dealing damage, so that your minions themselves don't necessarily have to deal all of the damage. And you can envision a board of 7 totems that all have different sort of triggers when a minion is attacked, when something dies, etc. Various triggers in your totems that are kind of pinging off your opponent's board. Now, who knows if this would be remotely balanced? Is 12 damage too much? It's impossible to say because this card kind of exists in a vacuum. The creator made one, envisioning certain things around it. So don't get too caught up on the numbers here. It's all made up. Nobody cares. It doesn't matter. Focus instead, I think, on the mechanics. If you think the mechanics bad, certainly feel free to share that. Just don't get caught up on the actual numerical values too much. And I think this is a great trigger. I mean, put this at the far end of your board. It starts chipping away your opponent's stuff. If it lives for like 4 or 5 attacks, that's fantastic. You've dealt, 48 plus damage. That's really good for a tier 6 minion. Could also get sniped early and do absolutely nothing unless you build your board correctly. But maybe there's another totem that gives it Divine Shield, which we'll talk about later in this video. And suddenly you've got this board that's dismantling your opponent's board without actually having the attack value. That's really cool. And from a flavor standpoint, I love this idea that Thunderon has a staff that he's just like slammed in the ground. And it's this awesome like lightning totem that's striking lightning anytime an enemy minion tries to attack. That's pretty cool from a flavor standpoint, even though I don't think Thunderon has a staff. It certainly wouldn't look like this, but you get the idea. It's a pretty fun design for a card. Next up here is Cairn's Lament from Tenji here. It's another tier 6 totem. I went for the big ones first. Another 0/12 totem, actually weird. First time this minion is attacked, redirect the attack into another enemy minion. So it's basically a misdirection style card here. Cairn's Lament's a really romantic name. I guess it's kind of referencing the fact that like Cairn died and maybe it's redirecting a poisonous minion in this particular instance. That's cool flavor. I like it. Whatever. I like big, awesome legendary names for totems. That's cool. So anyway, your opponent has a giant cave hydra. They attack into your Cairn's Lament. Instead of Cairn's Lament getting attacked, it's going to redirect that cave hydra into one of their minions, an enemy minion, and they're going to cleave their own board to death. And that could be pretty amazing. Of course, it may just redirect any other random 2020, and that 2020 is going to attack something, but essentially, you're sacrificing the ability to have stats on your side of the board for your opponents who kill their own stuff. It's a misdirection style effect. That could be too powerful, right? Like you could just wipe out 2 of your opponent's minions for 1. But again, you have to kind of give some leeway to the idea that we don't know what other totems would exist. And we're not saying all of the totems in this video would be the totems that exist in Battlegrounds, but this particular one could be part of some unknown totem set. So perhaps the game could play around that really well, and maybe there's strategic implications there about like giving this taunt or not giving it taunt, and your opponent trying to line up attacks into this sucker. Maybe you just use, a zap to try to snipe this thing early, and zap redirects, and then it's totally fine. And this only goes off once, so it's not like it's doing anything after that. It's just kind of a dead minion on board after that first big hit, but maybe that first big hit's enough. So again, a really fun way to take a 0 attack minion and still give it some sort of attacking influence, which is exactly what I think we'd need for totems. Probably, again, a nightmare to balance, particularly this one doesn't have a lot of scalability. It's kind of a binary style effect, so could be risky for a game mode like Battlegrounds, but nonetheless, good flavor and a pretty nifty design idea too. So next up is the Totem of Agony, and this guy does look quite agonized. It's Hubert 91. It's a tier 5 totem, and it reads, at the end of your turn, all enemy minions permanently lose 1/1 wherever they are. And by that, all enemy minions. I'm assuming that means all enemy minions across all boards, not just like the enemy minion you're going to fight next, but everybody. So theoretically here, a ginormous debuff, but a symmetrical debuff as far as everybody else is concerned. But for you, it's potentially a ginormous advantage. And maybe this is how totems could keep up. Instead of scaling your own board, maybe they unscale or descale or shrink your opponent's boards instead. And so it's almost like a reverse, Light Fang style effect of some sort, where you're not buffing your stuff, you're just making everybody else's stuff way smaller. And imagine this in gold, right? It would shrink everything by 2/2 at the end of turn. Truly a reverse Light Fang across all boards. It would occasionally kill minions. So opponents would have to be prepared for this to be a thing. It's like, I can't run that selfless hero or it's going to die and it's going to be useless. Now, maybe it gives, maybe because of that, the selfless hero gives something Divine Shield in the Tavern phase. And maybe that's actually a strategy you could play towards. I don't know how that'd work, but a fun idea. So this is essentially a different angle you could take totems in, where it's all about disrupting your opponent, descaling your opponent's stuff. Is there another word than descaling? It sounds so weird. Shrinking, whatever, minimizing, ruining your opponent's stuff. That would be a fun angle for totems too, and you can imagine other ones in this vein that do similar sorts of things. So you don't really need much board as long as you're kind of messing up what your opponent's trying to achieve and keeping their stuff really small. It could allow you to play a lobby in a very different way. So next up here is the Storm Totem from Rob K. A little bit like Thunderon's staff we had earlier. A nice lightning themed totem, but a different spin. It's a tier 4, 0/8 totem, and it reads, whenever this minion takes damage, you would deal 2 to 3 damage to all enemy minions. So basically a lightning storm would be cast every time this minion takes damage. And again, that would be a great way for this to chip away at your opponent's board. And, theoretically, just if it dies even in one hit, it would deal, 14 to 21 damage to your opponent's board, which is pretty big for a tier 4 minion, right? That's a lot. But also, because the increments are fairly small at 2 damage, that might not make a huge impact. It could also disrupt Divine Shields and etc. But you can imagine just taking 2 health off of everything. If your opponent's way bigger and all of your stuff has 0 attack, they're still just going to murder you if it's not enough. So you would want to get this like really high health totals. Certainly goldening this, at 16 health and it's dealing 4 to 6 damage. That's a much bigger chunk. But you can see, again, this is a different plan. Maybe you'd use this in conjunction with something like Thunderon's staff, so that you're just chipping away every time something gets triggered. Your opponent's getting a little bit weaker and weaker. Again, I'm sure a nightmare to balance, but I think this is exactly what totems would look like. And this one's a perfect home run for a shaman-themed, lightning-themed totem. It delivers excellently in that regard. Now let's take a look here at the unfinished totem from Fubar's, a tier 3, 0/3 totem. It reads, this minion can form a triple with any other totem that you have 2 copies of. So this is a bit like the Zephyrus hero power. And for the record, this was submitted before Zephyrus was revealed. We've had these for a while. So congrats, Fubar, on predicting that sort of wild card effect. But it's perfect for totems because you're carving it out of wood. So you're buying this, you're carving it to match the totems that you already have on board, thereby creating your triple and discovering something amazing. And that's really, really good from a fantasy standpoint. Like, that feels so rewarding thematically. I think that's exactly what you'd like to see in totems. That said, from a power level standpoint, this seems pretty good, right? Like, that's quite valuable. You'd be tripling a lot potentially. It's not hard to get doubles, and this is just that tier 3 wild card. There's a lot of tier 3 minions laying around. So you would have triples everywhere, I think, if this were in the game. That said, maybe that's how totems play. Maybe it's all about tiering up and tripling up and just finding high tier build stuff sooner because it's all weaker. So you just accelerate sort of the golden aspect of your build, play for some gold grubbers, and boom, you got your totem build. So I don't want to judge balance again because it's really hard to say, but man, this card just knocks it out of the park otherwise. This one feels very realistic and very awesome. Next up here from Rhythms is a tier 2 totem, the Totem of Growth, a 0/3, and it reads, at the start of your turn, add a totem to Bob's Tavern. So we've got sort of a Ysera-esque effect here on this particular totem. Now, this is notably a 0 tempo totem at tier 2. You buy this, you're losing every fight, right? But theoretically, again, maybe totems are a way to like scale up really hard on goldens or super consistency, or maybe there are totems that play off of the number of totems on board. So having more could really help you accelerate and catch up in the late game by sacrificing some of your tempo early by playing really low statted minions, right? So that's what I'm envisioning for this card. Like, it would be a pain to buy this on 2, but you get such a resource advantage potentially, or at least such a like consistency advantage, I should say, that you would make up for it later, swing the game super hard, and just start dominating people with your late game totems or your golden minions, whatever it might be. So another kind of a twist on a known hero power, but in a fun way to take totems in a totally different direction than most other minion types in the game. So here's the Totem of Peace from King Kuba, a tier 2 0/6. It reads, whenever a friendly minion skips its attack, give it +2/+2. So this is sort of the reverse pirate card. You've got a bunch of totems that are sitting there not attacking. They're supposed to have an attack phase, but when they don't get to do it because they have 0 attack, the sucker buffs them +2/+2 to help them scale a lot. So it's effectively the tier 4 pirate whose name eclipsed me, the one that buffs when they attack, but it's a tier 2. So you can see it's scaling notably faster than it would otherwise from a tier standpoint, right? It's the same sort of buff, but tier 2 instead of tier 4. It's affecting totems, presumably, much like that one affects only pirates. So you're getting like a half as expensive card from a tier standpoint as the pirate one for the same buff. But you need it because totems have 0 attack at a base level. So you can see how this is all about being passive and sitting there with your totems, and maybe that rewards you somehow by scaling your totems on board. I don't know if this would scale enough. You could almost imagine it being even stronger because it's going to take quite a few skipped attacks in order to get enough buffs. And notably, once they get buffed, if they attack a second time, then they're not going to get buffed again. So this is limited. It doesn't ever repeat or recycle. It's just a one-time thing. It can buff itself as well, which is pretty neat. But I don't know if that's enough even at tier 2. It might be. Again, we have to see what totems would look like. But I think that's a really cool idea. Another different trigger here for totems, taking them in another new direction. So next up here is the Warding Totem from XBX, a tier 5 0/8, and it reads, whenever another friendly totem is attacked, give it Divine Shield. And I teased this one earlier a little bit here, but imagine if you didn't have stats on your minions, so you needed a long time for all those different trigger effects to go off. So you play this to increase the survivability of your totems so that you can like chip away at your opponent's board. And not worry so much about stat totals because everything's just kind of staying alive until this one gets sniped because it does importantly read another friendly totem. Now, that said, I think there's a major flaw with this card. If you give something taunt, if you give a totem taunt, and that's the only thing on board with taunt, what's going to happen is if this is hiding behind that taunt, your opponent's just going to attack the same minion over and over again, and it's going to get Divine Shield every single time, even with things like Wind Fury based on this wording. That minion will never die unless it dies to something from outside that, like, pings from Soul Jugglers, whatever. Those sorts of things could kill it, but otherwise it wouldn't die. So I think importantly, this card probably needs to have Taunt itself to balance that so that your opponent can actually kill this and get it out of the way. And then there's still that scenario where, like, all 7 minions have Taunt and they still kind of have to snipe this one before they're able to really address your stuff. Maybe you could balance it that way. But without Taunt, I think this card is potentially just game-breaking. Like, you could just never lose if the opponent didn't have the exact right counters to this sort of thing. So maybe you could fix that with other build decisions, and maybe it could be countered somewhere or another. But I think if you gave this Taunt, it would be a pretty easy solution. But then maybe most of your totems would need Taunt for this to be any good. So it's kind of in a weird spot there. But nonetheless, I like the idea of having something that protects your totems. Maybe instead of Divine Shield, it says, like, gives your opponent or your friendly minions plus 10 health when they're attacked. That could do a similar sort of thing, increase their survivability, not against poisonous, but still not have that like game-breaking state scenario that could exist. So maybe a major flaw in this one, but nonetheless a pretty neat mechanic idea. Just a little tweak here to make it feel realistic and at least somewhat balanced. And then finally here, our final card from Magic Milk, a tier 5 2/6 totem. Hey, some attack value. I love it. I think it's okay if totems have attack. This is more of the kind of walking totem that generally has attack that we've seen in Hearthstone. And it reads, whenever a friendly non-totem takes damage, this takes it instead. So a totem here that's more of a menagerie support card, perhaps, or at least, a non-totem support card in a way. that's pretty interesting. Or perhaps even you could have a board full of totems and maybe one minion that you're really trying to keep alive with a bunch of ancient guardians, or maybe that's what totems are all about, is like they don't really do anything in and of themselves, but they help you support one other key minion, like build up that cave hydra, build up that divine shield minion, and scale through empowerment of other stuff, because often totems are about buffing other things, supporting the person who's playing the totems, as opposed to doing anything really meaningful themselves. So I love that this card captures that idea. Like, I'm going to build this cave hydra, I'm going to protect it because my opponent's not going to be able to kill it, because every time they try, the ancient guardian's going to take the hit instead. Now, this is only a 2/6. It's not a great stat line, of course, even at tier 5. But it's like a divine shield you're putting on something else that's key. And if you have 6 totems, you know you're going to protect that one specific thing. And of course, you could probably scale this in various different ways, giving it higher health totals, giving it divine shield, etc., so that you're able to really protect that one key thing. So I love this idea of totems as enablers for some other key unit or key game plan. I think this card delivers on that pretty darn well. And you could easily envision a set of totems that are all about that. Totems don't play for themselves. They work together to play for one other key thing. I think that's a really neat idea that does fit the theme of totems rather nicely. So there you go, folks. That wraps it up for our custom totems. A lot of neat ideas explored there. I'm really curious how totems are actually going to fit into Battlegrounds. I think it's going to be a tough one to make work. Also of note, you'll note some of these totems don't have the word totem there as the minion type. I'm certain that's an oversight. Clearly, this literally says totem in the name. It's supposed to be a totem. I think the creators just forgot to add totem on occasion, but assume they're totems for the sake of this video. That said, we're done here. So if you want to submit cards for the next custom Battlegrounds video, then check the description down below, and I want you to make a card of a new minion type. So not any of the minion types we know in Hearthstone right now, but something different. Make it like a god type or an undead type, or if you want to be the most boring person alive, a human type, whatever. It can be anything if you're choosing. I mean, it should be Warcraft themed, I think, but expand on the types we have now, make something new, and try to convey a sort of play style or mechanic or theme within that type, so we can kind of envision what the whole minion type would be like. I still only want one card. Don't design me like 30 cards, like a full set. Just make one that best conveys what that minion type would play like and would be all about. So sort of a centerpiece card that really explains the playstyle nicely. So again, check the description for that. Until then, of course, leave your thoughts on these cards. What's broken, what's bad, what's crazy, what's not. Share your thoughts. I want to see them there in the comments down there below. Of course, always appreciate subscribes if you got them. If not, thanks for watching, and until next time, game on.
Step aside. Be purged!